Hello, everyone. Remember to smile today on this thankful Thursday. Be thankful, give praise to the Creator and the Almighty on being able to open your eyes. He who created gave you breath. All things are possible if you just believe. You got to have a little faith. So, we're going to go into everything happens for a reason. Last time we talked about a young lady named Zoe. Zoe lost her parents. I'm going to go back a little bit. I'm going to ask you some questions about. Let me flip through a few pages here. We talked about restless souls and other special people. We talked about the letter that Julie wrote to Myra when she was dying, and how she was an inspiration. And the questions we asked ourselves is, would you describe yourself as a restless soul? In high school, did you have a hard time fitting in? Is there some secret private part of you that you haven't felt comfortable showing anyone? When you see people who seem to really belong somewhere, people who live in a small town or people who come from a tight-knit family, do you envy them? Have you felt that you've been looking for something in your life for a long time, but you're not quite sure what you're looking for? And the statement was, if you answer yes to 3 or more of these questions, you can be confident you went through what you did to help you feel more at home in the world. It's perhaps to help you understand why you choose the life you did, or to show you a new and better way of living. Then we talked about, so that's what my home looks like. She gave the example of a 22. Here's an example of Zoe, a 22, was someone with a great but eclectic fashion sense who brought all her clothes at a vintage clothing boutique. She had short black hair and wore narrow black glasses and bright red lipstick. Think of Cyndi Lauper. Zoe was 13. Both of her parents were killed in a car crash. Okay, we talked about that. Now we're going to continue about Zoe. But Zoe it wasn't her being orphaned, but a restless, resistant, not easy, pigeonholed quality in her that made her struggle to feel at home in the world. A terrible tragedy had meaning for Zoe because it gave her more freedom to resolve the struggle of her own. We're going into the next section. That's just nuts. Zoe was lucky. Lots of people haven't found their home yet. For them, the meaning of what happened is to show them the way. And this is something they need very much. When you don't feel at home in the world, you feel there's something wrong with you. And the world doesn't feel right either. Now here's the good news. You're fine. The world is fine too. You're just a person in the wrong place. You're like a squirrel in the desert. Let me explain. I've heard people call them tree rats, but I love squirrels. My big old house is built on the land that slopes down towards the rear, and it's surrounded by tall trees. So my bedroom It's 4 stories in the air. And I basically sleep with the squirrels in the trees. Every day, I see them living their squirrel lives, playing, eating, running around, gathering nuts, and sometimes in the middle of a warm summer afternoon, sprawling out of the branch and dozing. I can see every day that a squirrel's perfectly at home in a world of trees. But imagine taking that squirrel and plunking him down in the middle of a desert. This wonderful animal will suddenly feel depressed, anxious, confused, completely at loss. There are plenty of animals who make a home in the desert, but not the squirrel. Not a squirrel. Hold on, be right there. Let me fold that page. There's nothing really wrong with that downcast squirrel in the desert. He's perfect, but he's only perfect when he's at home in a place with lots of trees. In the desert, a squirrel is an unhappy misfit. Now imagine doing something stupid, taking that squirrel in the desert to this therapist so he'll feel better. As the squirrel himself might say, that's just nuts. You could do squirrel therapy forever. But as long as the squirrel's in the desert, he's going to be miserable. But if you just pick him up and bring him to a place with trees, now he's at home and he's happy. There are so many people who are miserable because they are squirrels in the desert. Have you ever felt like you were a squirrel in the desert? They think there's something wrong with them. They endlessly try to fix themselves, but the fixing doesn't work. Yet they keep trying because it's hard to face the ways they're not at home in the world. And yet, how simple it would be if they could see there's nothing wrong with who they are. There's something just wrong with where they are. Somehow, in some important way, their life doesn't feel like home to them. But they can feel more at home than they ever imagined possible. They just have to look for ways that events in their lives are showing them the way home because this is what they need. This is something that the cosmos is trying very hard to give them. Vicky was dating Peter, a rich, handsome Wall Street guy who used to play football for Yale. It was a fairy tale romance. They were famous in their circle for being the perfect. Well, let me put this down. Ooh, didn't want to step on that. They were famous in their circle for being the perfect happy couple. One day, people found out that on spring break of her sophomore year in college, Vicky had gotten married. She'd been drunk. The guy had been a rock musician. The whole thing had been nuts. Vicky had barely tried to make it work, but within weeks, it was clear what a disaster it was. They got divorced. To Vicky, this was one of those things that she didn't want to talk about because it never should have happened. It was just a hiccup in her life. Do we have hiccups in your life? A meaningless era of youth. Yeah, I had a meaningless era in my youth too. I went and got married when I shouldn't have got married. So, but Peter felt betrayed. To him, this was huge. It wasn't like forgetting to mention a past boyfriend. This was a marriage, for God's sakes. He didn't buy Vicky saying that this guy meant less to her than any of her old boyfriends. To Peter, it was all about her withholding important information. He didn't know if he'd ever be able to trust her again. Have you ever been in that situation where you were with someone and you thought you can trust him? The fact that she was a wonderful person and they'd been incredibly happy together didn't help him forget and forgive. They broke up. Vicky was afraid she lost the love of her life. Time brought a whole new perspective on this. Instead of feeling that losing Peter was an unmitigated disaster, Vicky started realizing that there was a reason why this had happened. A darn good reason. Here's how she put it. Peter's dumping me eventually showed me what I need to feel at home in the world. Once I got over being heartbroken, I started to make things happen for myself. Well, I feel Vicky. Once I got over Ronald Hollins, I started making things happen for myself. I feel you. I did a lot of traveling. I'm doing a lot of creating. I have a life coach. I work my 3 jobs. I found myself, found out why I was born. Not asking myself, what do I want to be when I grow up? No, I found out my purpose. And I started writing about it and doing freelance publicity for travel destinations, hotels, resort, and things like that. And then I saw it so clearly. My destiny was not to become a housewife and a socialite, which is where I was headed with Peter. I needed to have a life of accomplishments. Life of accomplishment, action, and change. Peter was great, but he offered me a cocoon. I need to be an eagle. Saved by the bell. Ding. She said she needed a life of accomplishment, action, and change. AAC. Accomplishment, action, and change. And Peter wasn't offering her that. Peter wanted her in a box to be controlled. And instead, saved by the bell in her head, the light that came on, I need to be an eagle. I need to spread my wings. Now, we're on the next section. Free at last. Suppose you're one of the people who answered the diagnostic question showed that finding a home in the world is the meaning of some event in your life, but you don't know what that home is yet. How do you find it? As you'll see in the moment, the event whose meaning you've been trying to figure out will point the way home for you. You'll find your way. I'd like to ask you to do something. There you are, feeling somehow lost in your life. Imagine that feeling as lost as you do. You cross the deepest river and climb the highest mountain to find the cave where the wisest person in the world is. What can I do to feel more at home in the world? You ask. This wise person shows you where to go next in your life by telling you the very story of an event whose meaning you've been trying to understand. That's it, you say. How does that point me to the right direction? Think about your story in a new way. The wise person says, you've been thinking of it as a loss. Now think of it as a liberation. What happened to you is actually freed you up. And it didn't just free you up in old ways. It freed you from some dead weight of the past so you could find a new home that could bring life, some part of you, maybe the best part of you. This is exactly the conclusion that everyone came to who found that the reason something happened to them was to show them the way home. It was always to free up some part of themselves. that never would have come to light. Now they could burst free, and this part of themselves that freed pointed directly towards where they would feel at home in the world. Now, let's talk about Vicky. Vicky had lost Peter and life she would have had with him. But when she thought of this same story as liberation, she immediately saw the direction it was pointing her away from what would have been a boring, confining marriage and towards a life in which she could make something of herself. Free at last. This freeing of the self so it can find its way can be about anything. Maybe you'll realize that you'll feel much more at home in the world if you stop selling real estate and become a school teacher. Or it might be the other way around. Stop working at certain jobs and follow your dreams. Follow your purpose. Maybe it will point you towards your getting out of your current relationship or finally committing to a relationship. It might involve being more committed to your art or to making more money, opening up your own business. Okay? Whatever it is, it will have to do with living life more on your terms. Cosmic Kindergarten has given you the gift of liberation. Look at what happened to you. Find the way it freed you up. Finding my coach, Carla Nicole, it wasn't an accident. It happened at a time in my life when my second husband, Theodore Shackleton Smith III, passed of COVID. I was going through a grieving process. I was rolling to my phone, happened to see her, happened to listen to her message, and I've been with her ever since. Find the way it freed you up. Then you'll see an arrow pointing to the right home for you. Next topic, a spiritual homegoing. What happened to you might, for example, mean that you'll feel more at home in the world if you open up the spiritual part of yourself. For this means becoming more devoted, more committed to some religious spiritual practice. But for many others, it could mean becoming more patient, more thoughtful, more in touch with what's really important to them or important to you in life. One thing that's the same for everyone, though, is the fact that daily life, as most of us lead, it makes it hard to be spiritual because there's so much social media and so much in the air. Some people need to go out and try grounding. Take off your socks and run through the grass. Just make sure you go somewhere that the dog don't poop. It's difficult to resist the inherent pressures of our workday routine. No wonder it often takes the shock of a personal upheaval to liberate our spirituality. After a heart attack or a car crash, it can be hard to return to business as usual. As Carol put it, I just went in for minor surgery, recovering from the operation. I remember walking slowly down the hospital corridor thinking I was over the hard part when I suddenly felt so weak and tired. It was like my life essence was evaporating. I was convinced I was dying. It turned out that I'd developed a post-surgical clot. I really did almost die. When I finally recovered, my family was crying. They'd given me up for dead. Why did that happen to me? I wondered. Then I started thinking, after an experience like that, do just go back to worrying about whether the drapes match the rug I couldn't. What happened to me freed me from all that I'd really religiously as a kid. And now all I wanted was to go back to being the kind of person who cared about her religion. I've been so grateful that I had that brush with death. I wish I could say that I did something really amazing. But what I did was certainly amazing to me. It's not just that I went back to church. What's that? An hour every Sunday? No. I really made full commitment to the church. I'd been away for so long that I didn't know what that meant. When it comes, you can have a connection with God, and not only in church, but your spirituality within the cosmic energy and the universe. You can connect in many ways. So long, I didn't know what that meant, but I just kept looking for ways to throw myself into it. Then, while I throw myself into it, I have to tell you that I kept wondering where this had been all my life. My life had been great, but now I was really at home. I felt a sense of being I felt I hadn't felt since I was a child. Now we're going to talk about a tale of glory. It was no accident that Carol talked about returning to caring about God and her religion the way she had when she was a kid. Here's a valuable tip. If you really don't know where home is for you, then think of yourself as somehow having left home a long time ago. Home for you is that place you left. It's something from way back, maybe your childhood, when we all have the most intense feelings about being at home. Whatever happened to you liberated you from something. So, could you go back home? Here's another valuable tip. Figuring out how what happened to you contains clues to how you can find your way home. Complete the following phrase. There's something missing in my life that would make all the difference to my sense of being at home in the world. And it is, okay, now think about what you just said is missing. Think about how what happened to you gives you the chance to get it. Here, too, I found that people discovered again and again that they could only get what they needed to feel at home in the world by having gone through what they did. Think back, for example, to great spiritual seekers and teachers in history. For most of them, their journey began some calamity, cast them into dark night of the soul and liberated them so they could find what had been missing. Take Brother Lawrence, author of the great spiritual classic, The Practice of the Presence of God. His tales of woe was the only path to what turned into his tale of glory. That amounted to his feeling at home in the world in a way that perhaps few people ever. Born in 1614, Brother Lawrence became a soldier at 18, served in the 30 Years' War, was captured, charged with a spy, with being a spy, and almost hanged. He was released back in action. He witnessed many atrocities and was wounded in combat. After his military service, he became a servant, but he failed at this because he was so clumsy. Then he became a lay brother, the lowest rank of the religious ladder in the Carmelite order. He worked in the kitchen, but then when he developed painful gout, he was forced to work in the loneliness of a shoe repair shop. He fallen as far as you can fall. He was all alone, but he was alone with God. And that, without his realizing, was the home, his life, had finally liberated him to find, alone with God at the bottom of the religious ladder. There was nothing for him to do but to talk to God. It was there that he developed his amazing ability to live intimately in the presence of God through his constant conversation with God. The book he wrote about how to do this has been a classic for more than 300 years. Vicky, Carol, and Brother Lawrence were squirrels in the desert, perfect in their own ways, but lost in trouble in another. Then, as happens in cosmic kindergarten, they went through some difficult events that liberated them in a way that brought them home to themselves. We are all squirrels in the desert. We are perfect in our own ways, but lost and troubled in another. So let the cosmic kindergarten lead you through some difficult events that liberate you in a way that can bring you home. Everything happens for a reason. So we read A Tale of Glory, A Spiritual Homecoming, and Free at Last. The section of Free at Last, you find yourself free. Found reason for something that happened to them to show them the way home. Show your way home. Let the cosmic kindergarten of being a squirrel in the desert find your way home. And free. Ask yourself, look at what happened to you. Find the way it freed you up. Then you'll see an arrow pointing to the right home for you. Don't live in a cocoon. Everything happens for a reason. And remember to smile. Have a blessed day on this Thankful Thursday. Peace.